I remember the day I first walked into Technova, feeling my heart pound with excitement and hope. The office was cramped, the computers outdated, and the coffee machine forever out of order. But I didn't mind. I signed on for meager pay, often late, convinced I was part of something bigger than myself. That belief fueled me through sleepless nights and endless checklists. I poured my energy into every task, writing lines of code, troubleshooting bugs, pitching new ideas. Even with doubt tugging at the back of my mind, I couldn't help but feel a spark of pride in what we were building. In those early days, I survived on takeaway meals and the occasional encouraging smile from colleagues. Sharing jokes about our overworked schedules, we formed an unspoken bond, united by impossible deadlines. Sometimes I'd catch myself dreaming of the grand unveiling, when Technova would finally make its mark. Those dreams pushed me onward, reminding me to ignore the fact that paychecks barely covered my bills. I kept repeating to myself, this is what loyalty looks like, this is how greatness starts. And yet, beneath my optimism, I felt a quiet ache, wondering if I was making a mistake. There were moments when I'd pull an all-nighter, only to see the sunrise through the office windows. I'd bury my fatigue in a fresh cup of coffee, telling myself it was just temporary. Once I had to borrow money from a friend just to cover rent, but I brushed off the shame. After all, I believed the company's vision was worth a few personal sacrifices. People around me seemed to come and go, often lured by more stable opportunities. But I stayed, too stubborn or too hopeful to let go of the dream we had ignited. Slowly, Technova climbed the ladder, snagging new contracts and inching toward recognition in the market. I remember a flicker of excitement each time we secured another client, thinking my sacrifices were finally paying off. Although I occasionally noticed whispers about how older hires like me were replaceable, I shrugged them away. Surely our leaders would reward loyalty and dedication, right? So I pressed forward, believing that my role was secure, that I was more than just a cog in their machine. Little did I know that my faith was about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. I remember one chilly morning when the heater broke, and the office felt like an icebox. My breath turned into faint clouds as I typed lines of code, shivering in my thin sweater. Despite the discomfort, I felt a surge of pride knowing we were all in this together. It reminded me of my childhood home, where we layered blankets because the furnace was ancient. That shared struggle forged bonds among us. There was a sense we were fighting for something real. Even in that bitter cold, I believed the warmth of success would soon envelop us all. At times, I'd glance around and see colleagues nodding off or rubbing their eyes, each of us juggling fatigue. We'd compensate with a never-ending supply of instant coffee and those stale vending machine snacks. People laughed about living on caffeine and hope, but deep down, we were all pretty anxious. During lunch breaks, we'd gather in the break room, half eating, half venting about the uphill battle. I'll never forget the way we'd encourage each other, promising that every sacrifice would pay off. Back then, I truly believed our loyalty would be met with appreciation and respect. As Technova started gaining traction, outsiders began to marvel at our sudden success. They didn't see the weekends we skipped, the birthdays we missed, or the paychecks that arrived late. But I saw it all, felt it all, and let it fuel my determination to stay the course. Looking back, I was so naive, clinging to the idea that leadership recognized my devotion. I'd lie awake at night, recalling stories of my grandfather who toiled in a factory for decades without thanks. I promised myself I'd never be taken for granted like that. Yet there I was, on the same track. Still, every small victory lit a spark in my heart, like when we sealed a deal with a major client. That deal meant the possibility of actual raises, of real growth, and I thought it signaled a turning point. I took a moment to celebrate in my own quiet way, allowing myself a slice of optimism. In the back of my mind, a little voice whispered doubts, but I pushed it aside. I convinced myself that hard work never goes unnoticed, that eventually we'd share in the rewards. Little did I realize, a storm was brewing, one that would test every ounce of my faith in Technova. One evening, as I left the office under flickering fluorescent lights, I felt an unexpected chill in my chest. It wasn't just exhaustion from another 14-hour day, it was a strange heaviness. I tried to shake it off by reminding myself of our recent progress, the new deals inked. But something about the dismissive looks on some managers' faces made me uneasy. They seemed more eager to impress investors than to recognize people like me. Still, I clung to my belief that dedication would someday outweigh short-term profits. I recall a pivotal moment during a big presentation, where I poured my heart into showcasing our latest project. Despite weeks of preparation, I barely received a nod of acknowledgement from the execs. They quickly turned the spotlight on a fresh recruit, someone they said would bring in new blood. I felt a sting of jealousy and hurt, but I pushed it down, telling myself I was just overreacting. That night, I stared at my reflection in the train window, wondering if my efforts were being overlooked. Yet I convinced myself one more time that my loyalty would eventually shine through. Over time, the gossip around the water cooler became harder to ignore, hinting at layoffs or performance reevaluations. Rumors swirled about the company wanting to streamline costs, focusing on innovative talent. I caught my breath every time I heard such talk, but I tried to stay positive. After all, I had given Technova the best years of my life. Surely they wouldn't cast me aside now. I told myself that all the years of unpaid overtime and unwavering support had to count for something. Little did I know how soon I'd be forced to confront the harsh reality behind those rumors. Late one night, after finalizing a critical project, I sat alone in the dim office, my eyes aching from the screen's glare. A wave of nostalgia swept over me, and I recalled the scrappy, hopeful days when we were just a small team. Back then, I had pictured this very moment differently, imagining cheers and collective relief. Instead, I felt a growing unease, like a shadow creeping closer no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. I sensed that everything I had built here was more fragile than I dared admit, and as I closed my laptop, I had no clue how dramatically my world was about to shift. I can still feel the flutter of nerves that gripped me when my manager summoned me to his office. For days, rumors had circulated about a reshuffle, but I kept telling myself I had nothing to fear. I'd given Technova years of my life, so I walked in with a smile, expecting maybe a promotion or a raise. The room felt oddly cold, and I noticed the VP of HR seated in the corner, eyes focused on a laptop. Something in me wavered then, but I pushed away any negative thoughts. Surely they just wanted to discuss my latest project or announce some well-deserved recognition, right? The manager, normally chatty, looked at me with an expression that sent a chill down my spine. He began reading from a printed sheet, voice monotone and clinical, barely meeting my gaze. My heart pounded as he spoke words like underperformance and outsourcing new talent. I wanted to interrupt, to defend myself, to remind them of all the overtime I'd logged and crises I'd averted. But shock pinned me to my chair, and I found myself struggling to catch my breath. His words kept coming, each one feeling like a knife twisting deeper into my sense of self-worth. For a moment, I genuinely thought it might be some twisted prank. After all the years I'd poured into Technova, the idea of them discarding me so casually seemed impossible. I felt my cheeks flush with a mix of embarrassment, anger, and utter disbelief. I tried to compose myself, clearing my throat to speak, but no words came out. They hammered me with corporate jargon, performance realignment, new strategic directions, like it was a script. My mind raced, reeling from the crushing realization that I was nothing more than a statistic to them. Before I could process it fully, the HR rep slid a severance agreement across the table, eyes cold as steel. I tried to protest, but she just tapped her pen, directing my attention to some small print. A wave of humiliation washed over me, knowing I'd be escorted out like a potential threat. All those memories, late nights, missed family events, the unwavering loyalty, rushed through my head. This was the thanks I got. A scripted farewell and a handshake that felt more like a slap in the face. And right then, something inside me began to crack, as I realized my faith in Technova had been tragically misplaced. Leaving that office felt like a walk through a fog, every step heavy with disbelief. I clutched the severance papers, my mind replaying their cold words over and over. Outside, the bright hallway lights felt harsh against my eyes, amplifying my sense of exposure. A security guard hovered nearby, waiting to guide me out like I was some sort of criminal. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure, but my throat was too tight for comfort. All I could think was, after all these years, this is how they choose to remember me. As I approached my desk, coworkers peered at me with sympathy or confusion, unsure of what had transpired. A few hurried over, asking if everything was all right, and I mustered a shaky smile. I wanted to scream, to tell them how disposable the company had made me feel. Instead, I just gathered my personal items, photos of family, a mug with an inspirational quote. My hands trembled, and each item felt like a relic of a time when I believed we were a team. I could almost hear the clock ticking, urging me to clear out before things became any more painful. Memories flooded my mind, the nights I stayed behind to troubleshoot server crashes, the weekends lost to coding marathons. I recalled lunches eaten in minutes because deadlines wouldn't wait, and vacations forever postponed. In that moment, every sacrifice replayed like a slow-motion reel, mocking my naive faith. People around me whispered, their eyes darting away when I glanced their direction. I felt an overwhelming wave of betrayal, like the world was suddenly colder, emptier. Yet, beneath the shock, a spark of anger kindled, fueled by the injustice of it all. Escorted toward the exit, I thought of the CEO's lavish bonuses and the extravagance I'd only heard rumors of. It struck me that while they celebrated in private jets, I was now jobless, robbed of recognition. Anger pulsed through my veins, momentarily overshadowing the sadness that had gripped me. I inhaled sharply, telling myself I deserved better, that I wouldn't let them reduce me to a forgotten footnote. Deep inside, a plan started to form, a quiet vow I made to myself right there in that lobby. With each step out the door, I felt a new determination rising, even if I couldn't name it just yet. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the city's noise swirling around me like a harsh reminder of reality. It felt surreal to stand there unemployed, discarded after giving so much of myself to Technova. My mind buzzed with confusion, resentment, and an aching sense of betrayal. In the blur of traffic and chatter, I caught my reflection in a glass window, looking oddly lost. An emptiness settled in my stomach, mixed with the embers of a deepening anger. Even then, a small voice in my head whispered that this ending was far from over. I wandered aimlessly for a while, letting the city swallow my footsteps, unsure of where to turn next. Friends and family crossed my mind, but I dreaded explaining how callously Technova had tossed me aside. A dozen questions battered my thoughts. How could they do this, and why didn't anyone warn me? Eventually, I ducked into a quiet cafe, my hand shaking slightly as I reached for the door. Settling into a corner seat, I stared at the severance documents, feeling the weight of my lost identity. Part of me wanted to rip them to shreds, while another part sought to channel my fury into something more tangible. Sipping lukewarm coffee, I replayed the manager's words in my head, every syllable stinging like a fresh wound. Their casual dismissal of my contributions stoked a fire within me, a need to right this wrong. I thought about all the secrets Technova tried to bury, the overlooked infractions, the hush-hush deals. My loyalty had kept me silent before, but that loyalty was now shattered beyond repair. I found myself grasping at an unexpected idea. Maybe I could expose their dark underbelly. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to believe. A sudden wave of clarity hit me. I knew their systems, their weaknesses, and the skeletons hidden in their closets. I could feel a flicker of purpose igniting, replacing my despair with a determined resolve. Technova had underestimated me, and that would be their downfall. I was sure of it now. Glancing at the time, I realized my future was no longer tied to their chain of command. I was free to chart my own course, and I couldn't wait to begin. For the first time that day, I felt a hint of triumph, knowing this was only the start of something far bigger. I woke up the next morning with an unfamiliar surge of energy coursing through my veins. Gone was the sense of helplessness I felt leaving Technova. In its place stood a fierce resolve. I couldn't forget the look on the executives' faces when they cast me aside, dismissing my worth. Their arrogance was a disease, and I felt strangely empowered by the idea of taking them down. I spent hours sorting through old files on my laptop, recalling every flaw in Technova's architecture. My pulse quickened as I realized the magnitude of what I was about to do, turning their secrets into ammunition. In my small, cluttered apartment, I began pinning ideas on a corkboard, connecting dots like a detective on a case. I detailed every shadowy practice I'd witnessed, the hush-hush accounts, the ignored security protocols. It felt surreal to hold the keys to Technova's downfall right in my hands, like I'd uncovered buried treasure. At first, I questioned whether I could actually go through with this. worried about crossing moral lines. But then I recalled their hollow thanks, the severance package that felt more like a bribe for my silence. A part of me whispered that justice was overdue, and I allowed that voice to guide me forward. Determined not to act on impulse, I reached out to a few former colleagues, those who had been burned before me. Through encrypted emails and discreet phone calls, we pieced together a fuller picture of Technova's rot. Some were reluctant at first, afraid of legal repercussions or plain old corporate intimidation. I couldn't blame them. We'd all been conditioned to remain loyal, believing our day of reward would come. Yet, the more we talked, the more we realized that unity could shield us from Technova's ruthless tactics. The seeds of an alliance were planted, promising to unearth every dirty secret the company fought to conceal. Each new snippet of information felt like a step closer to redemption, a path to reclaiming our dignity. I compiled spreadsheets of fraudulent spending, stashed away under misleading budget labels. I uncovered data breach cover-ups, times they'd silenced employees who dared to speak out. Every revelation fired me up, reminding me of the nights I spent protecting this place while it thrived on deception. I began to see how easily Technova had exploited our loyalty to tighten its grip on success. It was time to show them they'd made a grave mistake in underestimating those they once called disposable. I started mapping out Technova's vulnerabilities, recalling every late-night conversation and frantic crisis meeting. All those times I'd been told to keep quiet or not rock the boat now felt like a goldmine of evidence. I compiled emails, text messages, and voice notes, threads that hinted at the bigger story behind Technova's facade. It amazed me how much dirt I'd inadvertently collected just by being the go-to person in emergencies. Each time I unearthed a new piece of corruption, I felt a jolt of vindication course through me. I realized that every shred of loyalty they exploited was about to become a weapon in my hands. To stay under the radar, I used burner phones and encrypted chat apps, always careful about digital footprints. Trust was a fragile thing now, so I kept my circle small. Only those I knew had nothing left to lose. Some nights I barely slept, consumed by spreadsheets and cryptic references that led to hidden transactions. I learned to spot patterns, money funneled into suspicious shell companies, projects that disappeared into black holes. It felt like piecing together a massive puzzle, and with each connection made, my confidence grew. I knew that once we struck, we'd have enough proof to bring Technova to its knees. Memories of the day I was fired fueled my resolve. The echo of that cold, dismissive meeting room kept me going. I couldn't help picturing the executives' faces when these documents eventually came to light. Would they feign ignorance? Would they attempt to buy their way out, just as they'd always done? The thought both angered and excited me, pushing me to dig deeper, to find airtight evidence. I wanted there to be no escape routes, no pathetic excuses for them to hide behind. If they thought I was just another disposable employee, I'd show them how wrong they were. Meanwhile, I started sending out feelers to potential allies in rival companies, curious if they'd be interested in my skills. I figured the best way to hit Technova was twofold: expose their sins and bolster the competition. A few hushed conversations gave me hope that my future might not be as uncertain as I'd feared. Perhaps I'd land on my feet, stronger than ever, once the dust from Technova's downfall settled. Still, I refused to lose sight of my main objective. They had to be held accountable for their betrayals. And with every passing day, my plan grew more concrete, inching closer to the strike that could topple an empire. I remember one late-night conversation with a former colleague who'd been laid off even before me. He confessed that he'd once tried reporting Technova's unethical practices, only to be silenced with legal threats. Hearing his story made my blood boil. It only reinforced my mission to bring them down. I jotted down every detail he shared, recognizing patterns that matched my own discoveries. It struck me how systematically Technova had manipulated and disposed of those who dared to speak up. Yet for every intimidation tactic they'd used, we now possessed another piece of the puzzle against them. Piecing all this information together felt like constructing a labyrinth, with Technova at the center. Every twist and turn revealed another skeleton hidden behind their polished corporate image. I almost admired the audacity with which they'd swept their transgressions under the rug. Almost. But admiration morphed quickly into determination, because I saw how it had ruined lives and careers. A close friend recalled how they'd been coerced into signing a gag order to keep their severance. I couldn't let that kind of exploitation continue. It was time for a reckoning. One by one, more voices joined the cause, people who had no reason to fear Technova anymore. It was like a floodgate opening, each story more appalling than the last, painting a grim pattern of abuse. I absorbed their accounts, adding to my mountain of proof, feeling an unexpected solidarity in our shared fury. The more we learned, the clearer it became that Technova's leadership thrived on secrecy and intimidation. But there's one thing they underestimated: how unity among the wronged could become their undoing. I felt a resolute calm wash over me, certain that we were on the right side of this fight. Late at night, I organized all the evidence into a comprehensive dossier, complete with timelines and testimonies. My heart raced as I realized how powerful this document could be, a ticking time bomb under Technova's feet. I imagined the day these revelations would see the light, toppling their fortress of deceit and arrogance. What started as a personal vendetta was evolving into a collective pursuit of justice, and it felt unstoppable. I knew we'd have to tread carefully, because one wrong move might tip them off and bury our efforts. Still, the plan was in motion, and I could sense the final strike drawing closer with every passing hour. I woke up that morning with a knot of anticipation in my stomach, knowing that the pieces were finally coming together. Our dossier against Technova had grown far beyond my initial expectations, packed with damning evidence. Still, a tiny voice inside me wondered if we had enough to truly crumble the walls they'd built. I brushed that doubt aside, reminding myself that justice often demands calculated risks. Every story shared, every document uncovered, felt like another brick in the foundation of our cause. And as I sipped my coffee, I promised myself that all our efforts would not be in vain. I spent the morning refining the final sections of our report, reorganizing timelines so the evidence told a seamless story. It was strange to reflect on how meticulously Technova had guarded its secrets, never suspecting someone like me could unravel them. A surge of pride warmed my chest, reminding me that vengeance wasn't my only motive. Truth itself mattered here. Yet with each page I reviewed, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all those who'd been wronged and silenced. Finishing the last edits, I took a deep breath, ready to move forward to the next phase. My phone buzzed with a message from one of my closest allies. She'd snagged a meeting with an influential journalist. My heart skipped a beat at the thought of our story going public, images of headlines dancing in my mind. Part of me trembled at the risk of retaliation from Technova. Their reach was far, and their pockets deep. But the desire to shed light on the company's atrocities outweighed any lingering fear. I pictured the executives' reactions when their pristine reputation took a nosedive before the media. It was a wild, exhilarating feeling, like standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to jump. Before heading out to meet this contact, I glanced at the mirror, noticing how determination had replaced the defeat in my eyes. I thought about the countless hours spent behind a computer screen, building Technova's success without a second thought. Now, every ounce of that knowledge would serve a new purpose, exposing the leaders who betrayed us. My stomach fluttered with a mix of nerves and excitement, knowing there was no going back. Stepping out the door, I clutched the dossier tightly, reminding myself that we were fighting for a cause bigger than our pain. And with that, I set forth, hoping that by day's end, we'd be one step closer to finally taking Technova down. Arriving at the cafe for the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that each step took me deeper into uncharted territory. The journalist was already there, a stern look on his face that hinted at the gravity of our conversation. I slid into the chair opposite him, carefully placing the dossier between us like some priceless artifact. My hands trembled slightly, but I reminded myself of the countless people whose stories hinged on this moment. He asked me to summarize our evidence, and I felt a wave of emotion tightening my throat. Still, I pressed on, recounting Technova's darkest secrets, determined that every word would hit its mark. The journalist listened intently, scribbling furious notes while occasionally raising an eyebrow at the sheer audacity of it all. I showed him confidential memos, hidden ledgers, and testimonies from those who'd been threatened into silence. With every page turned, it became clear we weren't just telling a cautionary tale, we were detonating a time bomb. He asked pointed questions about the possible fallout, lawsuits, safety concerns, even personal backlash against our group. I breathed in deeply, admitting the risks, but asserting that the truth needed to surface regardless. The hush between us felt electric, like we both grasped how monumental this revelation could be. After outlining Technova's vulnerabilities, we discussed the timing of the story's release, weighing how best to maximize impact. Part of me buzzed with anticipation, imagining the headlines and the panic that would grip the boardroom. But another part acknowledged the looming danger, wondering just how far Technova would go to protect its empire. He assured me his publication would stand behind the whistleblowers, providing layers of legal support if needed. That gave me a spark of hope. Maybe we weren't as alone as we feared. I left the meeting with a sense of cautious optimism, feeling like we'd just crossed a critical threshold. Stepping onto the bustling street, I clutched the dossier tightly, determined to keep it secure at all costs. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, reassurances, doubts, visions of triumph. I couldn't help picturing the moment Technova's upper brass realized their house of cards was collapsing. Yet I also knew the fight was far from over. They had resources and ruthless ambition on their side. My phone buzzed with a message from an ex-colleague, hinting at new leads that could strengthen our case even further. And as the city's noise enveloped me, I sensed that the next steps would be crucial in bringing this corporate giant to its knees. That evening, I locked myself in my apartment and carefully reviewed every new piece of evidence. Whispers of Technova's desperation trickled in from contacts still inside, fueling my determination. The higher-ups were growing jittery, I heard, but they didn't yet grasp how close our strike was. I felt an odd satisfaction knowing they were scrambling behind their pristine boardroom doors. Still, caution remained crucial. A single mistake could blow our cover and cost us dearly. When I closed my laptop, I realized we were on the brink of something massive. I called a late-night meeting with my closest allies, each logging into a secure video call from anonymous locations. In hushed voices, we strategized the next moves, timing the release of evidence for maximum impact. A surge of adrenaline rushed through me, recalling every personal sacrifice that had brought us here. Despite the risks, nobody flinched. If anything, the stakes only sharpened our focus. I shared the journalist's insights, explaining how a well-orchestrated reveal could catch Technova completely off guard. Every nod on that screen reminded me we weren't just fighting for ourselves, but for all they'd wronged. Later that night, I caught myself drifting into memories of my old desk, my old teammates, and the dream I once had. It hurt to realize how quickly loyalty can be turned against someone in the corporate machine. Yet, instead of regret, I felt a fierce pride in what we were about to accomplish. I thought of each coworker who'd quietly slipped away, too beaten down to fight back. They deserved better, and so did I. This mission was as much about closure as it was about revenge. Finally, I let out a steady breath, determined not to falter when the moment to strike arrived. With every hour, the plan took clearer shape, like a sculpture emerging from a rough block of marble. I watched the clock tick closer to our rendezvous, that pivotal point when we'd unleash the full force of our findings. A slew of what-if scenarios flashed through my mind, but I pushed them aside, trusting our preparation. By now, there was no turning back. The momentum had grown too strong, the stakes too high. Somehow, the tension made me feel more alive than I had in years, like I was finally reclaiming my worth. And as the night wore on, I braced myself for the final moves that would shake Technova to its core. Dawn broke on the day I'd been anticipating, a surge of adrenaline cutting through my morning haze. All of our preparation, every late-night conference call and painstaking file review, pointed to this moment. I felt a strange calm settle over me, as if the gravity of what we were doing finally crystallized. I reminded myself that the goal wasn't pure destruction. This was about exposing truths and righting wrongs. As I read over the final draft of the exposé, my heart pounded with both trepidation and exhilaration. I took a deep breath and glanced at the clock, certain that Technova's fortress was about to face its reckoning. The plan was seamless. The journalist would break the story early, triggering a media frenzy before Technova could react. Meanwhile, we'd release the evidence on multiple platforms, ensuring it spread faster than any gag order could contain. I double-checked our encrypted backups, confirming every document was safe, even if Technova tried to shut us down. My phone buzzed non-stop with messages from collaborators, each one brimming with a shared sense of resolve. Despite the tension, I felt a surge of camaraderie, like we were part of a collective awakening. And with each beep of my phone, I knew more people were standing up to the giant we once feared. That morning, I made a point of wearing the same jacket I'd worn on the day I was fired. It felt symbolic, like a reminder of who I was then and how much I'd grown since. No longer just another expendable cog, I was someone who refused to be silenced. As I headed out to meet with a key ally, I thought back to my first day at Technova, so full of hope. The memory stung for a moment, but it also fueled me, stealing my determination. I gripped my bag of documents, certain this time was different. I was stepping forward on my own terms. Nerves fluttered in my stomach when I saw news alerts popping up on my phone, early signs our efforts were taking hold. Within minutes, messages flooded my inbox. Former employees cheering us on, reporters requesting interviews. I felt a spark of triumph, visualizing the panic in Technova's boardroom as they realized they'd lost control of the narrative. Yet I also knew this was only the first tremor before the real quake. If the executives thought they could squash this with a few public relations tricks, they were in for a rude awakening, and as I prepared to face the next wave of challenges, I couldn't help but feel this was just the beginning of their downfall. Not long after the initial news broke, my phone nearly exploded with calls and texts from former coworkers. Some were startled, others elated, but all of them shared the same stunned amazement at Technova's exposed underbelly. I assured them this was just the beginning, urging anyone with evidence to come forward without fear. Their stories echoed my own. Lost promotions, abusive deadlines, hush-hush firings, all surfacing at last. Though I felt a tinge of sadness reliving old wounds, I also sensed our collective relief blooming. For the first time in ages, we weren't alone. We were a chorus speaking truth to power. As lunchtime approached, I glanced at my phone to see countless missed calls from unknown numbers. I suspected Technova's legal team might be in a frenzy, trying to track down and intimidate anyone involved. A part of me quivered at the thought of lawyers and cease-and-desist letters, but I kept my resolve firm. After everything they'd put us through, fear was a luxury none of us could afford. I decided to let their calls go unanswered. It was time they felt the same helplessness we once did. Instead, I dialed the journalist, confirming his article was still trending across major networks. He sounded breathless, rattling off updates on how Technova's stock prices were nosediving by the hour. Apparently, shareholders were in full panic mode, demanding answers and an emergency board meeting. Hearing that sent a shiver of satisfaction through me, imagining the frantic chaos in those executive suites. I pictured the CEO pacing, phone in hand, belatedly realizing how badly they'd miscalculated. All those high-level folks who once boasted of untouchable power were now under the glaring spotlight. And I couldn't help but think, this was exactly what they deserved for underestimating us. By mid-afternoon, news channels replayed clips of Technova representatives stumbling through half-baked apologies. They spoke of unfortunate oversights and isolated incidents, dodging the full scope of our revelations. I watched, arms folded, shaking my head at the absurdity of their damage control attempts. It seemed they had no clue how much more was waiting to be released if they tried to cover this up. A few texts pinged through from allies inside Technova, confirming internal emails were flying in a blind panic. With each update, I felt a renewed determination, knowing the real showdown was about to begin. By late afternoon, the media storm had intensified, with new allegations surfacing almost by the minute. I heard rumors that Technova's board was split, some pushing for full transparency, while others clung to denial. A sinking feeling in my gut reminded me these corporate titans wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, the outpouring of support from former and current employees made me feel less like a lone whistleblower. I realized our collective voice was growing louder than Technova had ever anticipated. The pulse of adrenaline running through me hinted that we were inching closer to a climactic showdown. Inside sources leaked snippets of an emergency all-hands meeting, where executives fumbled for any scrap of credibility. Apparently, their attempts to paint us as disgruntled ex-staffers fell flat when even loyal employees spoke out. That news made my heart race, knowing their smear campaign was already backfiring. I couldn't help imagining the CEO's face as revelation after revelation undermined his carefully crafted persona. A sly grin tugged at my lips, recalling how he'd once dismissed me with barely a glance. Now, the company he'd lorded over was struggling under the weight of our collective truths. As I scrolled through social media, I spotted posts from people worldwide sharing their own workplace horror stories. It dawned on me that our fight was striking a bigger chord, representing more than just corporate malpractice at Technova. We'd opened a floodgate of pent-up frustration, triggering conversations about ethics and employee rights. Reading these posts, I felt a sense of purpose, remembering why I risked everything to expose the truth. We weren't just dismantling one corrupt empire. We were shining a light on a problem that spanned far and wide. This realization fueled me even more, reminding me there was no room for second-guessing.